you're joining us for an artist talk. These 6 artists are going to present their work to us. Each of these artists are included in this exhibition that you're in the middle of, which is Brett Abbott Selects. This exhibition features 85 works from our permanent collection, representing 44 artists. Our photography collection at large is roughly 350 pieces right now and growing. It's about half the collection, just for nerdy statistics. But this is a very small selection of some wonderful art that's included in this exhibition. A little bit about Noel, he's going to speak here a little bit to introduce himself to you guys. He is the curator of photography at the High Museum of Art, and just recently joined us in April. We're very excited to have him. He was coming from the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, where he was the associate curator of photographs. We're grateful that he has his talents and his time that he's willing to give to us. Each of these artists are going to be buzzed by a net if they go over 10 minutes. No pressure or anything. And I ask that you wait till the end to ask questions. So we also have a film installation by Micah Stansel that's going to be up in the other room afterwards. And I think that's it. So without much further ado, Mr. Rotajich.
Hi, good evening. Isn't this amazing work?
Yes.
Let's have a hand for all of you. I'm not going to be up here long. I just want to say thank you to Annette and all of the staff here for inviting me to come in and to spend some time down in the storeroom. It's really a kind of a luxury, even for a curator, to be able to do that and to not have to think about condition reports and titles and dates and all of this stuff when you're going through the storeroom, and instead to just be down there looking at the images and see what strikes you, see what moves you. And that's really what I did down there. I didn't go in with a preconceived notion of a theme or anything like that. It really just was about what struck me as I went through the collection, and I hope some of that visual wonder and exploration is coming through in the final product. I was really astounded by the quality of work in this collection. Annette has done a really good job of growing it in interesting ways, and I hope all of you will continue to support her in that, because it's a really special resource, and to continue to support the artists here in the community, because we really have a lot of talent right here in our midst. So I don't want to take up time talking. I'd much rather hear from the artists. That's when Annette asked me if I wanted to do a talk on the show, I said, no, let's hear from the artists. That'll be even more of a special experience, because I'm still learning about them myself as a newcomer to the region. So let's turn it over to them, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
So the first artist we'll hear from is Sheila. Pree.
Now, what I'm going to do is start a timer. When it started, it's going to go off at 9 minutes, and I'm going to let you hear what it's going to sound like. And that means you have 1 more minute.
Good evening, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. I have a very low voice, so tell me to speak up if I need to, okay? I'm going to start talking about my body of work called Suburbia. And I'm a transplant I'm an Army brat that came to Atlanta in the 1990s, 96, 97. And living as an Army brat, my cultural experience and identity was around multi-ethnic people, not just African American people. And when I came to Atlanta, it was so different for me because I was trying to connect with my blackness, okay? Even though I'm black, I'm trying to connect with my blackness. So I started photographing in the urban areas, and you'll see right here is some what do they call them, shotgun houses. I didn't even know what they were until I came to the South, and I called my mother, and she said, well, child, you're in the South. I said, okay. So I was always pointing my camera in the urban communities, and these are the type of images that we all see of African Americans that kind of defined us in the media. So I wanted to point my camera, that's kind of short, I don't know why, but I wanted to point my camera into the urban, not in the urban communities, the suburban communities, because there's a very large community of African Americans here that are just African American communities. So I felt that the black middle class was invisible within contemporary art, world, and pop culture, and even globally, because if you think about blackness within a global content, you see urban. You think about hip hop, and you think about urban. Do you think about suburbia? And I call this body of work Suburbia. I chose not to for you to see the people, because I wanted you to really, the images are very subtle. I really wanted you to be engaged more of the surroundings, the environment in here. And you see a woman, but you will never see her face, and you see her meeting business week, the future of technology. And then in this picture, I don't know why they're very small, large, but in this picture, if the other half is over there, you see a little book called The End of Blackness. And that concept is more about how African American culture is very diverse. And if you look at this home right here, I don't know if you would think that would be an African American home. I won a major award in 2006 with this body of work called the Santa Fe Prize Award. And I had to go down there in front of publishers, editors, curators, and they really talked to me about my work. And most of what they told me was that I didn't have enough signifiers in the work to show that these were African American homes. And we live in the 21st century, and that was the point of this work right here. and here you see a president of an African American male that served his country. And it was really interesting because I would go in the closets. And this was in the closet, and this image of a portrait of these blacks were there. And those images, it was strange to find that for me in there. I don't know why they didn't preserve it and hung it up. But you don't see a lot of those images in the homes. And then when I went in here, this was more modern, and the shoes to show of a woman. You see an African piece in there. And it could be in anybody's home, not just an African American home. And then we see a presence of a child's room, and over here you see father and mother, and within the media, it's like the black male is not present at home at all. So these do have a lot of signifiers in them, but they might not be necessarily signifiers that the media project to all of us. And a lot of times it's the presence of a male there too, in that African Americans do eat healthy too. Yeah. And this is a newer image. A lot of the homes that I'm going into now and that I do visit, I see a lot of President Obama's stuff in the homes. And I thought this was very interesting to see an image of this painting of this woman, like back in the day, and she's braiding the girl's hair, and it's like how far an African American come, and you have a president and Michelle Obama with that, and I just found that very, very interesting. So my work always challenged the perceptions of culture, identity, and to a bigger mass of globalness. And I don't have anything else to say. Because it's like, when you say 10 minutes, I feel like I have to rush, with that. But I'm going to...
You've got 3 more minutes.
I have 3? Oh, 3 more minutes, yeah. But like I was saying, this work was more about the invisibility of the black middle class here in Atlanta. And I really had fun with this work. I did not realize I was going to win a major award with this, and this was something that somebody nominated me for. And I'm glad that this body of work was able to get out amongst, it's done a lot of exhibit. It was in PhotoFest at the U.S. Contemporary at PhotoFest. they had a topic of U.S. contemporary photographers. And I feel that this body of work is very important because of what it represents, and to show that how African Americans are very diverse. They're not just hip hop, they're just not urban, they're this too. And it's very complex, very, very complex. So,
I am an artist, but I wore anti-black. I'm going to talk about my Cuba work, which just came down today from Sandra Hudson Gallery. And Bill Bowling and Michael David Murphy did a catalog to go with it. It's the first catalog from Fall Line Press that they've done to go with the show. And unfortunately, Bill had a death in his family, and so we don't have any catalogs to sell here. They're very inexpensive, and they're very nice because they have a lot of wonderful pictures in them and a great essay. And anyway, I've titled this talk, "The Struggles of a Photographer, a Low-Tech Conversation." I pride myself on making images of what I don't know rather than taking pictures of the everyday tourist attraction. It pleases me when a viewer prefers an image that I feel is one that most people wouldn't have seen or taken. But I did have some images in the show that were very Cuba tourist things that are lovely photographs, and they were big and beautifully printed. And so a lot of people liked them, but I didn't like that. They liked them better than others. And I have written that I try to keep my mind and eye open to things that I don't recognize or might have not noticed. I try to let go of my preconceptions and let intuition and chance take over. Being stuck with what you know often keeps you from seeing what you don't know. With no premeditation, spontaneity can take over, which is the keystone to my best work. Too many choices. You know, when you just come back from a trip, I was there in March, and this show was just this last month. I had a very hard time choosing the images for the show, but it ended up being a beautiful show thanks to Debbie and Robin.
Yes.
And Debbie's here.
Lots of beautiful shows.
Anyway, and then APG came along with a contest for a portfolio. And so I had to pick 20 pieces to send to Julian Cox, our ex-curator, who was judging this contest. And so anyway, you pick your favorites, the most interesting, most telling about a place, or wait to hear what others think about you. That's the easiest way to do it. But anyway, I did get in. There were 70 entries from 12 states in Canada, and he picked 7 of my pieces out of the 20, which was the maximum that he picked. And he chose 2 pieces that I hadn't even selected for the Sandra Hudson show. I hadn't noticed them when I first went through my digital images. But anyway, he picked 2 of them for the anyway, this is one of my favorites. This is called Grill. It's painted Cadillac emblem. I really didn't look to see what kind of car it was, but I really love these alien faces down here on the grill. And this was coming out of a restaurant, top floor of a building, and in one of the rooms there were these people playing dominoes. And so of course my camera led me in, and all these other people that I was with were like, see, that's why she gets good pictures. She just goes after it. We stand back and, you know, take a picture from way back here. So anyway, I really do like that image a lot. And this was one in Ernest Hemingway's house, and it's, he was trying to lose weight, and he lost 40 pounds during this time. And, so anyway, he has it written on his bathroom wall. And this was, I think, a sculpture in an artist's house that is all about the books from Russia that were written about Cuba. And I mean, it's a very interesting image because of what it says about Cuba and the influence Russia had on Cuba. And this is one of my favorites because I think it's so scary. I mean, it's really a scary image. And this is the lady with the cigar. She was in her 90s. I think she's been sitting in that same place probably for 80 of those years. And I think people have been taking pictures of her. But my picture was 30 by 40 on the wall. And so you can see all the burns in her pants, and actually you can see more on the left side. Why is that? But anyway, she was quite a remarkable woman. And this one, we were walking through a building, and there were men sitting down here watching this television set. And I took this picture, not knowing whether it was going to work or not, but I love it. And somebody that came to the show asked me if that was the room we stayed in. Oops, we'll go back. So anyway, I will wave this about because this catalog is at Fall Line Press, which is part of Jennifer Schwartz's gallery, and there's some wonderful images in it, and it's beautifully printed, and it's got a wonderful essay by Jonathan Marner, which, so anyway, I would encourage you all to look for it at Fall Line Press. It's called Fallout. It's the first catalog that they've done for a show. And so anyway, in my remaining minutes, I would like to, well, I guess I can't answer questions because they have to come later, but I'd like to talk about the work in this show that's from one of my portfolios called Intuitive Eye. And there are 5 images from that portfolio, all of which are I love. So anyway, if you would like to ask any questions about them, when it gets to be question time, you can do that. Am I done?
I'm really honored to be here, and I admit this now. I've never given a museum talk. I've never had a piece in a museum, and my piece is right behind you here. And it really is quite fun. And I want to thank Brett for inviting me to speak tonight. And tonight I'd like to talk about my photographic work in a series called Peachtree Battle, Imaginary War Play, which I made 2 years ago, but it's been a year-long process that this series took. And the series began with this shot I took of my son Adriano playing in Memorial Park. And here he has his little hands manipulating his army men. And at times he's holding the army pieces very close to his face. And he's mimicking sounds of gunfire and cannon fire. And it just, this image fascinated me in thinking of what children see when they're in this play. And is it a visual sight that they see in their mind's eye as they play? So what I wanted to do was try to recreate the magic. So this work involved, the work that evolved from all this thinking about boys, toys, fireworks, and explosions is a fantasy-based body of work as really kind of a recollection of my own childhood play with my twin brother. It explores a boy's fantasies of war play, of conquering and destroying, being fearless and powerful, and to be able to control our own lives. My work was something like a performance art, in that, like a child, I was building miniature sets, using forgotten materials, like, for example, on this, pieces of discarded tubing. The conning tower of the submarine is a scope bottle, and it's all built out of cardboard. And I fashioned bottle rockets into these ballistic missiles as I sat in my hot tub with paper surrounding me and launching this all around while I'm in this plastic box I made, hoping not to get burned. But this missile, for example, I can use the pointer right here, was the second missile that launched almost simultaneously with the first one that's blowing up. That went up, hit the arbor of the hot tub, and then shot right down, and it went underwater, burning, past my legs, up to the backside of the hot tub, where it was following the wall of paper around it, looking as if I intended on doing this, which is magnificent. But, so this work was like a performance art, and like a child, I was building these miniature sets, and using forgotten objects and materials from around the house in my garage. I created ships, planes, submarines, in their own right, really, which were pieces of art. And then I documented the glory of its destruction. I actually emotionally occupied the feeling as I'm constructing and then deconstructing these fantasy playgrounds. And I was shooting them, rebuilding them, shooting them, and rebuilding them until I was satisfied that I captured that defining moment. In the series developed from that simple observation of child's play, that it almost became more movie-like in productions, where I was using various scale toys to create false perspectives, and using smoke, mirrors, fireworks, and explosives as my lighting and special effects without the need of any computer work. I put together opposing lenses on the camera, a wide-angle lens combined with a close-up lens to try to mimic the perspective of a small child, bringing the action just inches from the camera lens. I saw myself on the ground or in the air in this example, right in the thick of the action, and it was seductive and exciting and dangerous. My heart would race as I'm watching the fuse being lit on this explosive device I put wherever it was in one shot, waiting and seeing that burning down with my finger on the shutter release, just waiting for that perfect moment, the optimal time to start the camera burst. And it was pure adrenal. It was such a rush, so much fun and so much laughter. It was just the funnest year I've ever had in my life doing this work. But it was play, it was therapy, but this project took a year long, and it really was a labor-intensive process of prop building, set construction, hand-painting backdrops, dismantling fireworks, separating all their components, and then reconstructing them into my devilish concoctions. I was using broken toys and unwanted junk around the house to create these imaginary landscapes, much as a kid would. A lot of people see this work as really powerful and disturbing. Among them, the former curator of photography at the High, Julian Cox. But I saw this as a fascinating exploration into my own personal childhood feelings, and by extension, the feelings that we all share as human beings, who are small and powerless, and looking for the boundaries of behavior in ways to make the world more our own, and possibly a way to release our frustration in adapting with family life or life on this planet. And as you see this image after image of explosions after explosions, well, I just want to talk about this one for a second because this was a model jet that I put a rocket engine on the back, suspended by wires, and then simultaneously detonating a sandcastle that I built, which you no longer will recognize, in this suicide jet pilot attack. And you know, it really is like a kamikaze shot. If you were a pilot, you'd probably see that you were screwed because you hit the ground. But where am I here? All right, it's important to understand that many of the tanks, the planes, and submarines were really all beautifully built models that I made from kits or from scratch that took days and weeks to do. And they became sacrificial objects. I allowed my boys to play with them for a bit, as if to say goodbye in some kind of ceremonial fashion. And then I blow them up. And so the question is, why are we so enthralled with the destructions of the things we once loved? And why is play violence often an outlet and an answer to, or a visceral thrill to our culture? Now, if I could, I just want to show one piece that I just made, where my work has been two-dimensional as of right now. And what I've done is, from these two-dimensional things, I'm trying to involve people in the series with now sense, touch, sound, and smell. And my intention is to help trigger the viewers' feelings, memories of their own childhood imaginary games. And that's it. So, Oh, yes.
I'm kind of unnerved by all that beeping. It sort of makes my heart beat race a little bit. I also wanted to thank Brett and to thank MOCA GA for including me in this talk. My work has often touched on issues of individuality. My work over the last 15 years has been a lot of very different, diverse projects, but they often circle back to ideas about individuality and how to navigate through a world of big box architecture and pre-planned communities and all the kind of sameness that we are surrounded with. But I'm not really interested in pointing out the monotony of suburbia and other things like that, because other artists have done that so well. What I'm interested in doing is taking pictures along the fraction points of ready-made societies. And so tonight I'm mainly going to focus on new work, but I just briefly wanted to talk about some of my previous series that fed into this idea. So at the bottom you see a picture called Stage Green, and this is from a series I did called Fiction, and it's about the imagined lives of strangers. I basically became a photographer because I was so enthralled with the work of people like Robert Frank and Sylvia Plackey and all the great street photographers, but I didn't really want to work in street photography in the purest form. So I began to make diptychs where I would pair two different images together to create an ambiguous visual narrative. So I like to think of these pictures as the first sentence of a story, but you could never know the ending. And then I'm going to get fancy with the pointer if I can. And then the second major body of work is called Love and Rockets. And I'm really interested in some of the belief systems that run through the American psyche, like the ideas of manifest destiny, the city on the hill. And so I photograph symbols of power and romance as a way to talk about those issues. And then the last major series is called Smoke Break. And I was a public policy major in college. I didn't go to art school till I was 40. So I kind of came about this in a roundabout way, and I'm interested in public policy issues. So I thought it would be interesting to do a portrait series on people that have continued to smoke in the face of public condemnation and legislation that's designed to remove smokers from the public arena. So I did this series over about 5 years, photographing smokers and the places that they've gone to. This is my current body of work. It's very different from the work that came before. I'm photographing and sometimes strictly scanning, without actually the use of the camera, books that have been withdrawn from libraries. And I'm doing this really as a way to talk about the passage of time and how technology has changed really fundamental things in our lives. So many people read electronically now. In fact, I teach at Emory, and I hear from my students all the time that they don't go to the library anymore. So this series kind of started out by accident when I ordered a book from Amazon, and I noticed that it had been withdrawn from a library in California. So that was something that just was sitting in the back of my head, and I started thinking about it and noticing it more and more. And then I actively went out and started searching for these books. And this kind of stamp that the librarians put on the book either says withdrawn or discarded. It's almost kind of like a slap on the face to the book. You're thrown out of the family. And I became intrigued with these books. Now this seems really different from my previous work because it's very narrow. I mean, each picture in the series is going to be a picture of a book. But I'm still interested in the little details that make each image interesting. For every book that I've chosen to photograph, I probably rejected 30 other books that have been withdrawn because they were simply too bland. I didn't really want to make my point through repetition, but I wanted each book to be as different as a portrait. This is a copy of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain.
I think is so interesting about books compared to reading electronically is that books bear the marks of their previous owners. So even though this book has been withdrawn from the library, it's been changed in some way by someone who's read it or used it over time. I can't remember the name offhand for the stickers people put in books that show they're from their personal library. But so someone had one of those with this interesting rabbit shape, and it was put directly on Tom Sawyer, this kind of old-fashioned illustration of Tom Sawyer walking away. And then it was ripped off at some point by a librarian. Oftentimes when the cards are taken out of the books, they're just sort of ripped off like that first blue image. And it leaves an interesting imprint. So you could give a Kindle or an e-reader to someone, but it wouldn't really have the marks of its former owners. And that's what I really like about these books. This is a novel called Drag Strip, which was written for teenagers. You know, and I just sort of love this little sticker that some teenager probably put in there, I'm guessing a girl. This kind of sentiment about life, and then this upside down withdrawn stamp, and then it came from the Chambly Library. So all of these pictures involved a search, much like the way I searched for images when I was working more as a street photographer. It's about going to lots of different places, searching through lots of things, and finding just the right thing. This is a children's book, and it had beautiful watercolor illustrations. And then again, the withdrawn stamp is kind of rudely placed there. So there's also a discussion in the library community about what should be saved and what should be taken out of circulation. It's actually called weeding, which I think is an interesting term. And while I don't intend my project to be a treatise on library science, I do think it's worth asking the question, who is the gatekeeper of printed materials? I've been reading a lot of library blogs lately, and one of the blogs that I read was saying, the author of it was suggesting that books should only be a backup for electronic material. And you know, that didn't insult me or anything, but it really made me think that everything is fragile. Electronic data is fragile. It can be deleted. Sure, you can burn a book, you can tear it up, it can be moldy, but you can also delete electronic data. So everything is fragile, and everything changes. And I think, like a lot of photographers, I'm always subconsciously trying to stop time in some little way. So that's a look at that project, which is ongoing. And my next project is really the anti-project project. And this is called All's Fair, and it's simply about the beauty, the wonderful strangeness of life. And how when you really, really look at things, you can transform and add to meaning by the act of looking. Oh my gosh, okay, so I'm going to hurry through now, because now I'm racing. All right, so these are all pictures that were taken either as someplace as common as my dishwasher or something sort of exotic like a wedding. I'm going to kind of fly through these because it's going to beep in a minute and make my heart race. These are also about finding magic in the mundane. Like this picture over here is a Taco Bell drive-in, but it's set in this amazing bucolic setting, and it's just like a strange, beautiful robot left in Eden. And this is the kind of thing that really makes me want to get up in the morning and find these great exceptions. And I'm also really interested in pictures that take me back to childhood, to when everything was kind of magic and fresh, and you can imagine, I was one of those kids that read too much, and stories about fairies and everything always in my head. So sometimes I tweak a picture. This is one of those gifts that you get when you work hard enough or travel enough. These are girls getting dressed in a parking lot. I guess it's really hard to drive in a hoop skirt. They have to be dressed in the parking lot. They are girls in Mobile that are called azalea guides, and they're kind of like part of the tourism department. And I was actually working on my Love and Rocket series, and there is a rocket right there, which is what led me there and led me to find the girls. And last of all, what's more common than a yard sale? But I thought this amazing gauntlet of stuffed animals is, you know, something you couldn't plan. It's wonderfully strange, yet completely ordinary. And this is something I'll probably be doing until the day I die. And I was probably doing this kind of work before I knew I was working. So I think this is probably a good place to end before it leaves. Thank you.
And Mr. Chip Simone.
Good evening, I'm Chip Simone. I'm a photographer and printmaker. Hello, Ted. I'll move this one. Yeah, that's me. Many of you know that a lot of my work was seen in the city for quite a while this past year. I had a show at the High that was up for 5.5 months. So I'd rather not go back over that material right now. And instead, I thought I would go back in time a ways, a few decades, sort of show you where some of this stuff came from, and then end with some of the work that I've done since the show went up. Anyway, I've been in Atlanta since 1972. At that time, many of us were working with large format cameras. In this particular case, we're talking about a camera that produces an 8x10" negative. I'm still a street photographer. I would just take the big camera out on the street with me instead of a small camera and see what difference it made. You're looking at photographs that were made where the Georgia Dome now stands, in the neighborhood that was known as Lightnin', which was where moonshine whiskey was made for the black community of Atlanta, hence the name Lightnin', as in white lightning. And I started going out on Sunday afternoons with my big camera, looking for the late afternoon light to reveal pictures to me. And I can say about my work, I'm formal. I have a great affection for the picture plane. I love elegant pictures. I love eloquence in general, and I try to remain consistent to those particular considerations all the time. And you're going to see nearly 40 years of work in the next few minutes. There aren't that many slides, but they take big leaps forward. And you'll see that there are certain things that move forward in time and remain fairly consistent, and then there are things that change. So for 10 years I worked with the big camera. The prints were all contacted at 8x10 inches. They were never enlarged. This is much bigger than any of these pictures that have ever been seen, certainly ever printed. And so I started first working out on the street, and then I began doing a series of portraits of Atlanta artists. On the left was Robin Johnstone, who had been the director of the photography program at the Atlanta College of Art for a number of years, and not particularly inhibited. Neither is Leslie Morris. Bless her heart, she passed away a few years ago. She's a choreographer here in town, a wonderful presence, a great contributor to Atlanta's cultural life, and a very courageous dancer. And she was the director of the dance unit, which I think was Martha Graham inspired, yes? Sort of at its core. And incidentally, her studio was located directly next to the first Nexus Gallery. And Lucinda and I were two of the founders of Nexus, the first photography gallery in the city back in 1973. And the dance unit was right next door. We used to listen to them through the walls of the gallery. But the work is formal. The big camera lends itself toward a deliberate kind of construct. But as you'll see, as I've moved onto a smaller camera down the line, I've maintained that affection for the highly structured photograph, the flat picture plane, and sort of moving everything up to the forefront of the image. These photographs were done in Washington, D.C. in 1978 or 9, and the picture on the left was the first of my photographs ever acquired by the High Museum, and the one on the right was is now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And when I was living in Washington, I befriended a man named Garrett Sander. Some of you might recognize his last name. His grandfather was August Sander, the great German photographer. And Garrett used to let me go back and look through the stacks of prints he had in the back of his gallery, leave me to my own devices. And I was, I have to admit, greatly inspired by the direct approach that August Sander made to his photographs. And I think some of that work is reflected certainly in these photographs and some of the others. All of these were part of larger projects, but I don't see myself as a documentary photographer per se. I don't feel the kind of obligation that documentary photographers seem to assign to the work that they do. Following that work, I received a grant from the National Endowment to go back to the community where I was raised in Worcester, Massachusetts. I used to hang out at this diner. John Evangelista, who's the man on the left, is still alive. His brother Larry on the right is deceased. He was a bookie and a short order cook. One day I was in there, it was crowded for lunch, and a police officer came in uniform and placed a bet over the din of the people eating. In other words, he had to yell about, well, he was betting on a number. And he had to yell the number to Larry, and Larry had to acknowledge that he had taken the bet and was standing room only. Of course, the policeman's name was Simone, a cousin of mine. But note if you can read the cost of things back then, I think the most expensive meal was less than $4 for a roast duck turkey. It's a good diner, by the way. It's still a 24-hour diner. But what I tried to do was to make formal, dignified photographs of a prosaic world. This was a tenement community where I grew up, and we all knew one another. So I had an inn. It was a big deal to have a local boy come back with this funding from the National Endowment, and to document the community, which then became a major exhibition at the Historical Museum of Worcester, and there are now 92 photographs from that project as part of the permanent archive. So it was a gift back to the people that raised me. Now, then I got a fellowship from the National Endowment following that other project, and I went to Curator film, which was a rather drastic change. And it was the first time that I took time to work with color. And Kodachrome, unlike the black and white work that preceded this, which was done on individual sheets of film, individually processed by inspection, most of you probably don't know what that means, but you can actually look at the negative while it's being developed under a green safe light, so you can really control the density of the negative. We're working at it, and the prints were made by contact method using a very elaborate formulation based on Edward West and Walker Evans's Amador formulations. Kodachrome is very different in that it was either right or wrong. You put the film in the camera, you took the pictures, you took it out, they developed it. What you got back was the film that was in the camera. And it was very unforgiving. It had an 8-stop range, meaning a very narrow dynamic range. Black went to black quickly. So you had to really learn the film and be very disciplined about using this film. So I would go out in the morning, stuff my pockets with rolls of Kodachrome film and a couple of lenses on my Nikon, and I would shoot all day and then go out to Chambly where they had a Kodachrome lab. You may have read recently that they closed the final Kodachrome lab. I think it was in Kansas, somewhere in Missouri or something. And we used to have one here in the neighborhood, and that was a great treat for me. So I got back on the street and worked with Kodachrome, but because I can work with the hand camera, the work became much more fluid. I'm still and remain very enthralled with planar organization, constructing a picture so that the frameworks, great respect and admiration for it, very Euclidean. And, but at the same time, I can find a picture that was totally unexpected, work very rapidly, make the picture, and then move on to the next picture, which is basically the methodology that I've continued to appreciate. After a few years of working with Curator, I decided to go back to black and white, and I spent a year in Piedmont Park photographing the people that I met and the things that I saw, and the result was this book, Uncommon Ground, and it was a series of photographs of the people that I met in the park, these being two examples of 72 that were in the book. But I also went out and looked at another side of life in Atlanta, sort of the demi-monde and the underbelly of the city, and I was very interested in that because I didn't find anyone was doing that. No one was really treating Atlanta as a city other than some notion of what the Old South used to be or what Gone with the Wind used to be. And I decided that I wanted to find Atlanta on my own terms. This is the pretrial detention center that was photographed through the door that they fed the solitary confinement cell. You might recognize these women. You've certainly heard of their mother, Sally Mann. This was done in '96. And Jessie, who's probably the better known of the two in the middle, saw me with the camera and decided that she was going to take control of the situation. She did what you see her doing there for my benefit. I never asked her to do it. And then some of the gallery scene. This was a young man who had something to show, apparently. And but I don't remember the gallery this was at, but the gallery scene was a very interesting one, and we're starting to show some change in the way we behaved in our culture. And then I started getting back into color, shooting with color negative. This was the Southeastern Fair done by Turner Stadium. And I would wander around with the camera, or this picture was done backstage at Grady High School during an amateur bodybuilding competition. So I like to go and look into things that are out there to be photographed that most people seem to want to overlook. And the picture on the right was done down at Underground, and the picture on the left was down on Auburn Avenue. So again, if you look back to those first pictures I did, these are not all that different. The construction is very similar. These were done very rapidly. The figure placement is very similar. And but I was always looking for unusual things. Now this was very difficult to photograph. This was the hood of the car. The hood of the car took me 45 minutes to find this picture, just walking around that particular car. And I found this downtown in Atlanta as well. And I have no explanation for this behavior, but I thought it was interesting imagery. And this picture was made in October downtown. This is while my show was up. And lastly, I did these two photographs in New York just a couple of weeks ago, very different from one another. The one on the left from St. Mark's Place, sort of like finding Chagall and the treatise of the street, and the other is at a Richard Serra sculpture exhibition in one of Gagosian's galleries that I thought was rather excellent and eloquent. So that's what I've been able to do.
I chose work from the last 10 years that I've been working. I've been a photographer for about 20 years. So most of this work is 2000 up until now. And it's all different series, and what I thought I would do, if it's okay, is read something I wrote, because I believe that it sums everything up in a questionably succinct way. It's a little dense, but I'm going to do it anyway. way to tie the work together when it's seemingly different in each form, one project from the other. All right. So, as the notion of community has become unhinged from the base of a geographical presence, my interest in the traditional form of community and its relationship to place is increasingly relevant. And the more conventional thread is fast becoming a parallel world to the virtual community played out online. The traditional stage I record occurs simultaneously, but is based in a sense of time that seems spatially different from the virtual. And in many ways, the cadence of time is the unquantifiable difference I aim to record. In my photographs, I employ the traditional academic genres of art to explore the nature of place and community. I use history painting, portraiture, landscape, and still life. Within these genres, I've elevated the quotidian small town. This is my work. I grew up in Dahlonega, so I'm a Georgia girl, and most all of my work is taken there. This approach references the traditional and the inherent moral force of each genre as it applies to a small town as a community that is not accessible to the world at large. It explores the traditional understanding of community and a personal history with one place, knowing that this experience in particular is not a singular phenomenon. While contact, both general and personal, is increasingly made through virtual community, my physical presence as photographer and the thingness of the still lifes I create serve to express a more immediate and physical engagement. The work eliminates the traditionally romantic role of the photographer as a necessary explorer and collector, the one that goes into the world to return with proof of being there. So, I can't remember what slides I'm putting, so I'll enjoy them with you. This is an example of a series of portraits that I made, titled Sweet 16, that's the title of the series. And these are all 16-year-old girls that I photographed who were all from Dahlonega, so where I grew up. I made this work after I graduated from graduate school. And I went home and wanted to make work that was very traditional portraiture and not really portraiture in the sense of, when you think about it as a photograph now, almost as a painting, a very, very traditional, socially based photograph. And so I didn't know any of these girls. I called the secretary from the high school, who was the secretary when I was in high school, and just said, hey, I want to make photographs of 16-year-olds and maybe give me one or two. And she gave me a couple, and then I would just go from there. I had like 3, and then I would say, did you have a cousin or a friend, you know? And so what was really fun about the project is I had never met the girls, and when they would show up, I didn't know what they were going to wear. You know, I told them we were doing a formal portrait, and that's as much as I gave them. And I didn't know what they would wear, I didn't know what they would look like, and then I constructed these backgrounds to go with each of them just when they would show up. And what I love about the world, what I love about photography, is when I made this picture, I got so excited. You can't really see it, but her little charm says Sweet 16. It was so beautiful because I already knew that was the title of the series, and you know, she just seemed to represent all that I was saying with a charm bracelet. Let's see. This is a landscape, and Chip was talking about using a view camera. So all my work is made with an 8x10 view camera, which is, you probably know it is, really large beast of a camera that I have a love-hate relationship with, that I still continue to use. And this is, it's called Familiar Landscape #1. It's from a series called Familiar Landscapes. And you know, I guess in a lot of ways it's romanticizing something that's not necessarily romantic. It's just a place where I grew up. It's these places that I would just stand and look at for years. I don't know how many of you grew up in a small town, but I wasn't sure I was ever going to be able to leave. I used to read books about people that moved because it was the 70s and everybody was moving. You know, it's when the world started moving. You know, before you were born in one place and stayed there. And I just wanted to move so much. And I knew we were never moving because my grandfather had a business he started, my parents ran it. And this is looking out this is, my parents had a dry cleaners, and I would work at the dry cleaners, and I worked every day after school, which is what I would look at every day, which seemed very mundane, and then in revisiting it later, it was really beautiful. It was actually kind of a privilege. Oops, I think I did it twice, no, I didn't. This is from a series called My 33rd Spring, and I can't remember if I put another one in there. This probably isn't the best example of it, but again, it's a very giant, these are 40 by 50 inches, so really large, liquid, romantic imagery of landscape in North Georgia. This is my dad. The title of this is Bride of Dixie, which you can't tell, but that's what the newspaper says down there. It was an antique show that used to be around. I don't know if it's still around. And so this is with the 8x10 camera, so you have to set it up. And I think, you know, when that work is best is when it's preconceived, because it has to be, in the sense that you're going through the effort of placing this large camera, you know, in front of something. But at the same time, you can kind of, you know, roll with it and see what happens once you set it up. So I had this other image in mind, and then my dad is doing his thing, the phone rings, which he cannot ignore a ringing phone. And so he goes over to pick up the phone and talk, and while he was doing that, I shot this picture, and it worked out really well. This is from 33rd Spring series as well, and it's called Blackberry Winter. This is my grandmother and my cousin, and my grandmother was covering, that's a, what do you call it, snowball bush? And my grandmother was covering it. We covered it because it got cold. It already had buds on it, and it got cold, so she wanted to go out and wrap it to protect it from the freeze that was coming, so that it would bloom as it should in the spring. This again is a portrait of my dad. It's called Dad with Machete. And he knows what I want him to do. I guess it's sort of like a Chip's picture of Jesse, Sally Man, you know. He knows what I want him to do. He's like, yeah, I got it, you know. Because we've been making these photographs for a while, or have been, and they are about, you know, there's this sort of heroism, this man in the landscape, these are the ones I relate kind of to history paintings, because to me they are a very important moment in my personal history. Important to me for that reason. This is from the last body of work that I did. So I had a show a year, can't be right, 2 years ago. So I just had literally a couple days, 2 years ago, in between children. And it was called Trigger. It was at Jackson Fine Art, and it was, oh God, I can't believe I actually talking. And it was, it's mostly a series of still lifes. It's a little more open. They're not as serial oriented as my work has been in the past. For me, it was kind of free, and they're like trompe-l'oeil, so each piece is the same. It's to scale the image, so it wouldn't be this large. It would be the size of the notebook paper. And these are evidence collecting from my life, and this is a note from, I can tell you, 6th grade, that I kept, and I don't know why, but still have them all. That's another subject. But I love the way they're folded. It was just a very sculptural as a thing, and you know, I'm not sure if kids fold notes or not anymore, but it doesn't matter what it says. That's not what it's about. This, with the series, was called, this is titled My Aim is True, and it's a couple of ducks that my husband and I shot on the wall. And like I said, this show is about I guess it's about collecting, it's about evidence of a life lived and immediacy of that, pretty much. How much longer? I know it's going to go off in 8 seconds, so. That's all.
Let's give one more round of applause for all of our brave artists from Brett Abbott. Thank you all for coming. Rather than put the artists into the grind and invite them up for a panel, I encourage you, they're going to spend some more time here for a few. We've got wine at the front. Please approach them and ask them all the many questions that came up throughout the presentation. And thanks so much for coming.